We are once again live with the Outcast Intellectual Podcast. And it has been a minute since we had the last episode. I had some stuff to do. But if you're watching this or listening to this at a point in the future, you haven't heard that, this is a pointless reflection now. But now we have an interesting call ahead of us because it's not really a call, it's an episode, right? Too many business meetings. But I'm hearing squeaking. I don't know. But if somebody doesn't know who you are, Lana, that's their fault. But just to kind of do a quick recap, you are already mentoring people like actively. Well, you've been doing it for a while. So you have a far more personal, I think, kind of experience of helping people kind of realize what we're going to be talking about on the call today than I do, because I've mostly just done it myself. But I guess it's just kind of interesting to think of just the different perspectives we'll have on it. But the general idea is, all rivers flow to the ocean. Like, to be living whatever point you're at in life, moving towards whatever like your overall purpose is, or like the things that matter most. Because I think that a lot of people, particularly like in marketing and stuff like that, they get kind of distracted thinking that they're supposed to be working for this or they're supposed to be working for that. And I imagine it's probably some overlap with coaching. Like it is business and everything. So I guess, like, have you tended to see like trends like that where like they think that they're moving towards the thing that they really want, and then like you ask them like 3 questions and they realize that they have no goddamn idea what they really are trying to move towards?
Well, yeah, like the main problem really is the clarity, because if you don't really know where you're heading, you can't really plan for the road to get there, for the steps.
Mhm.
And even if people have those kind of huge visions, they usually self-sabotage because it seems so big that they can't see the little steps then. So the first thing I would go for is really like, okay, so what is it that you actually want to do?
Mm.
And what is it realistically? Not that like everybody can say, oh, I want to be the millionaire, but like, what are you going to do with that money? Or like, what kind of lifestyle are you going to live? Or what does it really mean to be a millionaire? You can have $1 million in your bank and still live on the street, which it's not like typical stuff, but I have met really wealthy people who were dressed almost like homeless and they were happy, So it was like,
Right.
okay, well, no judgment. If you want to live that way, it's just your business, but at the same time, you really need to know how that life is going to look like, because if you don't, like, what's the point?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where a lot of people, they go without having money for so long that in their mind, probably subconsciously, but also just consciously, like they're at the point where like the answer to everything is money, right? Because it's like, now I have more time. Now I don't have to pay, now I'm not being harassed by like collection agencies. Now I'm not arguing with my spouse about, what, like so much of what most people are dealing with often does come back to money. And then they get to the point where they make enough money that all that stuff is taken care of, but they don't know what to replace it with. And so it's just, oh, well, if I make more money, then things will get even better, right? And then they make X amount of money, and or they don't. I mean, like, everybody's going to be coming at it differently. And I do make a point of not like assuming that everybody who's watching or listening to the podcast is in business, because this, it's not a business podcast. It's just kind of an overlap of, our similarities in like what we do. But even to use an example of people who are not, trying to make lots of money, or who don't, who are not in business for themselves, say they're like an employee for what they do, I think, like, as an example, like, there are a lot of mothers, well, and parents in general, who like they identify as their role of being the parent, of like providing for, or maybe the family in general, I guess, to be a little bit more holistic about it. But then they spend all this time and energy and whatever giving to the family, while also kind of like discrediting their own worth at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know about this one because like
Hmm.
my mom, for example, her big dream was just having kids. That's it. And you know, like if you have that purpose that you should have kids and like be a good parent, it just translates into what you do. And for her and her self-worth or like whatever value she has, the the thing is that it just like weighs on the same scale, like her
Hmm.
and being a
Okay,
parent.
it's
And then
interesting.
you need to decide, you know, like it's really important to decide that you are higher than your purpose, because if you're not, it's going to weigh up, and then you're doing everything for that kind of vision, but at the same time you're sacrificing yourself, and by sacrificing yourself you're actually hurting yourself and you're hurting that vision as well, because you can't achieve that vision without you being 100% you.
Hmm. It's interesting to me because a lot of people that I know who ended up having kids, it is kind of like they're using taking care of that kid as like their the determinant. I don't know if determinant's a word, but as if it's like the factor that shows that they're like that they have worth. And I it's not all parents I know, of course, but it's like there are definitely people who, if you gave them truth serum and ask them, do you as an individual feel like you're living a fulfilling life? That they would say no if they weren't able to come up with a bunch of nonsense, because it's kind of like how you'll have like parents who will like they didn't succeed at something and so they raise the child to be like a prodigy at that so that they can live through, live vicariously live through, the child in that case. And I guess to bring it back to, like the notion of the theme of the episode is that, like you mentioned, you need to have clarity on what that purpose is, like what the essence of your life really is to you, whatever form that might take, in order to live, aligned with that. But even when people have something that matters to them, there are ways that they can approach it that kind of bastardizes it in a way. And it's interesting because that like subconscious part of like people's minds, it's like they know that this has value and they know that it matters to them. And so by kind of scapegoating this thing that really means something, they can kind of have a half truth element to the lies that they tell themselves for whatever other reason.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, you have a lot of like limit, or like not you as a person, but like
like
human
the
being.
royal you, yeah.
Yeah, copyright there. You know, there are a lot of limiting beliefs that go with it. Because, for example, for me, I was doing it pretty much my whole life. Like everybody would come and ask me for advice, and it came naturally. Like helping people was something that I loved to do, and I just wouldn't believe that it would be so valuable for somebody that they would be actually willing to pay me,
Mm,
which was of course limiting belief. Because if you have like a complex thinking and you can explain things more simply, and everybody would be like, oh my god, this is so simple, how could I not see it before, you know, then
right,
of course they will be like, yeah, instead of like wasting hours and reading, I don't know, hundreds of books to get to the point where what I need to realize, if somebody can explain it to me the way that I will understand and I will get the point that I need, of course I will pay them. It
right.
just, what is more important, like, do you have resources to invest in something that will save you time, or do you have more time to really like just accumulate knowledge so you can then get the resources?
Yeah, I think it is. Even the notion of reading the book is itself kind of like an element of still deciding that they want that guidance, right? Because they're deciding that they're not going to like figure it out on their own. So either way, it's like it's a question of the scale of it, where it's like, and we know like from business, like generally like the more hands-on the the thing is, that the service that you're providing, generally the more expensive it is. So for example, like in your case, like one-on-one mentoring is like way more niche focus, whatever, than group coaching. You know what I mean? Which is still more involved than like a mindset framework or something. So it's kind of like that balancing of resources in general. And it's interesting how the person needs to get past that mindset like block or whatever of seeking help versus just trying to do it all on their own. But even the person who, like, for example, as like a coach who wants to be building their business, has to get past like the mindset block of, okay, at some point I need to figure out how to like make this work as a business while also helping people with their lives. Because if you're helping somebody who, this is an example that I use because I did work there, but like who works at a gas station, you literally cannot do enough one-on-ones with people who make that level of income on your own, without having other coaches like in like an agency or whatever, and not selling a framework or whatever, and actually earn a sustainable, like not a sustainable, but like a good living to let you like travel to other countries to like live the life that you want. But at the same time, if it's commoditized into just like, it's all about just like getting people to spend more and more money. Obviously, that's not really an alignment either, then, because you're not actually focused on helping. You're just focused on, like what I think a lot of pop psychologists do, where it's like they just find more and more issues with somebody so that they feel like they need to keep coming back. I'm not saying everybody does it, but it's part of the reason why I'm skeptical on that. But I guess thinking of it in terms of, say, like if you're in a situation that you don't really enjoy, like your day to day, which is I think really relatable for most people, which is they feel like something is always over there, and it's like they need to get to it. Like obviously you and I understand, it's like, well, if you set the thing as being over there, then mentally, even if we're not talking about energy or subconscious whatever, even just in terms of pure habit, you're teaching yourself to always think, well, what you want is over there, and you're
Yeah.
never going to reach it because you decided by the nature of how you're looking at it that it's over there. um, but even just from the perspective of what people are working towards, I guess, what have you found has been the most useful in kind of helping people bridge the difference from like, oh, I just need to do this so I can like make money and someday I can do the things that I really want, to like everything that I'm doing now is in service to the purpose that I'm trying to live? Because that's a perspective shift that you and I had to make. So if I had to
Yeah.
do it, it has to be valuable to other people.
I mean, like the attitude is one of the most important things, and one that I actually had naturally, like because I just didn't want to be bored in whatever I was doing. So naturally, I was like, okay, how can I have more fun, or how can I learn more? Because I really love learning, And it goes back
Mhm.
to what you actually like to do, like knowing what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and what you actually enjoy doing will help you extremely. Because for me, it was okay, I love helping people and I love learning. What does it mean? That I'm just going to pursue whatever there is in that kind of work. And what it meant for me was that I was climbing the ladder in corporate, really, really fast, because first I was really enjoying what I'm doing. And when you really enjoy what you're doing, you're learning much faster because your brain is like on high, like it doesn't feel like work. You just go there, you enjoy it. People love you because you are just spreading the good vibes. You're having fun, and you're just making it much easier for them to really survive that 9 to 5 that they don't enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
or even show them how they can enjoy it more. Because like in my teams, we always had fun. Like there was always something I came up with, or I like really told them to just make it fun. And when you do that, it's just like times goes by and everybody is enjoying it, having fun, having laughs. People are nicer, when you're on the phone with somebody, they can actually hear if you're enjoying it or not.
Yeah,
And then
even
you
the
get
sound of if you're
offers,
smiling.
yeah. And you get offers. Like I mean, in my every job I had, I always had it like from the outside an offer to do something else because they just enjoy my company. And it was fun, like when you do something and then somebody just comes to you and like offers you a sales job because they would really want to have a person like you on the team.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well, thank you, but I'm doing this right now, so no, thank you.
Right. And even, I mean, knowing where you were coming from with it, where largely, why you were doing it was just to be doing it at all, and that it wasn't necessarily that you wanted to be in sales. It was
Yeah.
just what you were doing then. So it's I could build a career doing this. This isn't a career for me. It's just a way for me to work on something I don't enjoy doing.
Yeah, but
You know?
it's the other thing, like if you have a look at something that you really, really hate doing, but you know that you're gonna need it in the future,
Mhm.
like why don't you enjoy it? Like, do other people actually like it? Is there a way for you to learn how to like it?
Mm.
Because for me, I'm introverted. Like I hated talking with people on the phone. Really just picking up the phone was such a big pain for me that I would be like, no, thank you. I would have my phone on silent all the time just so I don't have to pick it up. And then I would just message them. I could be like, I could spend hours on emails or text messages figuring out things that would take like 5 minutes on the phone.
Mm.
And I wouldn't mind, because it was less painful than being on the phone with that person.
Right.
But then you need to really realize that it was like a huge block because first I was wasting a lot of time. And second, like if you actually want to help people, you need to learn to communicate with them on all the forms of like phone and stuff. And
Right.
like being a mentor and having such a big limiting belief, it's just ridiculous. Like I can't afford to do that.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that kind of speaks to like the conversation we had on the other session that you were on, where it's like the notion of kind of leading by example in that sense, where it's, I mean, you can't profess that you can help people with mindset when you're actively seeking to stay in your comfort zone, right? At least
Yeah.
not, I mean, not in good conscience you can. Plenty of people do it on a regular basis, but
Well,
uh
you need to be aware of them, of course. Like if you are not aware of your weak, like blind spots, then of
but you
course,
probably shouldn't be teaching other people how to be aware of theirs either.
well, yeah,
As but it is interesting to me to think of like the notion of not wanting to like avoid going outside of your comfort zone to kind of, I guess, to live the purpose that you're pursuing. How do you reconcile that with also not uh, like not compromising on wanting to pursue that actual alignment? So as like an example of like, okay, there you had to get used to talking to people like on the phone because like you said, like to really help people, you need to be able to communicate with them in all these different ways. Versus there must be other times when like even when you had clients who like they would show up all the time and they were paying you consistently, but they weren't doing the actual work in between. I know that you've told me before where you're like, we're not gonna keep doing this. And there are a lot of coaches who would just like they would just keep meeting them every week because they would they were a cash cow. But in this case, that's something where, it would have made you more money in that sense. So one could argue that it helped you live the purpose in a certain sense, but it's like, how do you reconcile the difference between doing what's uncomfortable, what you don't want to do, and also just kind of rejecting um, the compromise, I guess, when it comes to your actually living the vision.
Well, I think it's more about integrity, to be honest, because at
Mm,
one point, sure, you can bullshit yourself and convince yourself as a coach as well that you're actually helping to people, because even though they are showing up on the calls, even if
mm,
they're not doing the work they should be doing, then you have to decide, like, okay, how are we going to address it? Like, is it going to be helpful if we address it in the way that, like, why you are not doing it? Is there something deeper that, like, lets you self-sabotage pretty much your work, your progress? Or is it just because you are not prioritizing yourself enough?
mm,
And at one point, like with some of the clients, I really had to decide, like, okay, this is just the attitude that they are not putting in. It's not about limiting beliefs or whatever. They're just not putting themselves first.
mm,
And they would show up on the call just to feel better. And for me, as a mentor, I was like, okay, but me continuing to do that, to work with them, wouldn't be helping them, because they would still feel okay. They would feel like they're doing something for themselves, but they didn't.
yeah. And as someone who's committed to the idea of like maintaining that the one-on-one kind of approach to what is still a business, the time that you would be spending doing that with them is time you're not spending doing it with somebody who would do the work too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's, for me, I'm just trying to think of like just the different ways where like these kinds of situations can be difficult for someone to perceive, because again, there is that notion of, okay, like where does setting boundaries, for example, begin, and where does like hiding in your comfort zone end, right? Like there's, because there are people, and I don't mean in this case, but it makes me think of things in the sense of like people who will like set boundaries to like insist like people need to treat them with respect, versus people who are simply insecure and calling it a boundary, for example, because it's the same thing in the sense of using like a purpose as a like a scapegoat, where it's like, say that the person has like a relationship or whatever, and they say, well, I'm focused on this thing. In some cases that is legitimately going to be the case. It's the same thing as like, well, if you have like a spouse and you have a child, well, you still need to balance the affection that, like, how you're trading that out to everybody. But at the same time, sometimes people are just not managing things properly. And sometimes they're just using the job or the child or whatever as an excuse for why they're not showing up for something that matters to them. And I think that that's there's like the ideal, and then there's kind of like the real world, like punched in the face kind of things that people run into. Because I mean, ideally nobody needs mindset, because they're just going to do the right things all the time, right? So it's like I try to think of the ugly element of it as well.
Yeah, the thing is that what you said is that they're not showing up what really matters to them,
Mm,
but the thing is that they are actually showing up for really what matters to them, and it's not them. It's going back to like the self-worth, not being good enough, because they always see that grass greener on something else, and they
mm,
don't realize they have to go back to that responsibility for themselves and improve they they image, like self-view, and just the basics, the foundation. Because every time I'm approaching, or like every time I'm mentoring, it goes back to the basics. like it might be from different angle, from different point of view, perspective, whatever, but it just nuance that you need to fill in because you got foundation for, I don't know, money, you got for the, let's say, some healing traumas, childhood stuff, but at the same time there was one thing that you missed, and that one thing is going to be limiting your growth at the next level, and it's going to show up in your relationship, in your life, how you show up and how you approach things, because it's going to go back to you.
So I guess to give like maybe like a since I can kind of detail a bit more, like a more personal example. So for example, when we were talking about I forget what the detail was, but it was something relevant to a conversation I had with my buddy Andrew Walden before this, where we were talking about maybe it was the integrity element of it, but being able to wake up knowing that what you're doing is something that means something to you versus just making money or whatever. Like I'm working on a project like that now, and I have like a small team that I'm working with and such, versus something that I'm doing that's already consistently making money, a decent amount of it, and that one could argue I'm compromising that in the name of pursuing this other thing. But at the same time, for me, I also think, okay, but then if I only do it when it's the right time, it's never going to get done because it's never the right time. And so it's kind of like, I guess that's an example in my mind of a situation where living in alignment with somebody's purpose in a real life situation, like what's like your, like your not your knee-jerk response, you know what I mean, like off the cuff.
Yeah, the thing is that like a lot of people would come up with the excuse like, okay, I need to make this amount of money to cover my bills, and because I'm already doing one work, I'm not going to have enough time to do anything else. But at the same time, if you really are connected with yourself, with your body, there is that drive, that thing that like just forces you to do more. And if people don't do that, they will burn out in the job. They do, because the resistance is going to be rising, because their body and like the soul or whatever you believe in, it's just going to push you towards the right direction, which means that the whole thing you're doing in 9 to 5 is going to be done in resistance, which takes twice as much energy as you would normally do that. Like if you're in the flow and you will be like, okay, I'm learning this, how can I use it in that thing? We talked about this before. Like if you find what is actually serving you in the thing that you're doing, you can find a lot of things, a lot of small things that are going to push you into the right direction, and you can master it and being paid for it. That's what I did with the call center, like I needed to learn to communicate better on the phone, but at the same time, like I didn't see a reason why I couldn't do that while being paid for it. So I get like 6 months, I think it was 6 months of training on communication for free, and I was paid for it.
Right.
And then I got a chance to actually test it with like hundreds of people on the phone and like really master it, and being paid again. Like you can do that. Like in offline world, there's still like people think that you have to have a mentor, or you have to have, I don't know, pay for ridiculously expensive courses or stuff and learn things online. But at the same time, they're not like realizing there's a lot of opportunities offline in the companies if they just bring the right attitude to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that even in the comparison with that I mentioned in another session, but I don't want to assume that somebody is familiar with that with your training with Shaolin. there's martial art, great, whatever. Like you know how to, kick somebody or punch somebody or whatever. But obviously that's not the only reason why you're doing it. And there are more holistic benefits to it. And I suppose it's interesting how the nature of some things that people do, they can see that. Like they can see that there's this holistic, like, only jackasses go to a martial arts school or boxing or whatever because they want to learn how to beat somebody up. It's like an incredibly insecure thing that, like, both of the places that I've been to recently, they actively made a point of like avoiding people who would be like that for good reason. Um, but then, like what you mentioned, where there are situations in normal life where you can use it as an opportunity to be building on different things, and that's something that I've always naturally been interested in, and just like because I like to get as much out of everything as possible, just because I'm impatient and I want it now. Uh, I would always be trying to think like, how can I make this happen while also doing this and also doing that? And yeah, it can be kind of stressful sometimes, but it's also like really enjoyable when I'm, in the right flow with it. Because, for example, the the project that I'm working on now is largely related to fiction, to novels and stuff like that, building a universe. And the second book in the series, I wrote probably 4, maybe 5 chapters of it while boxing drywall tape. And I don't mean like while that was my job. I mean while I was on the job waiting for something to come through the machine. And like while I was coming down the line, I would be thinking of like, hey, what's happening next in the story. And then when it was going through the machine, I'm literally just waiting for it to come out, for it to be sealed so I can put it on the pallet. And so I would like write down like half of a sentence at a time and kind of make that progress in that sense. And obviously that's a much more concrete example of that, because I'm actually getting some of what I really want to be doing done in the moment. Whereas what you're talking about is kind of the soft skill version of that, like the thing that you need to make it work. But it is interesting to me that there's certain activities where people go into it looking for that holistic benefit, or most people do, compared to something like doing their job, where it's like, I just really don't want to be doing this anymore. It's like, but you realize that while you will be doing it for something that you want over here, you're still going to have to address the same kind of problem. And so you don't need to necessarily enjoy doing this thing now. I mean, you might as well, but if you can't, you at least need to know how to solve whatever this problem is, because you will have to face it doing the other thing you want to do in some form, further down the line. And I think that's kind of going back to what you mentioned before, well, your reflection on what I had mentioned of how people will develop here, here, not there, and then here, here, here. And that is the thing where they just always fall down. It's just interesting to me to think of, particularly having worked with like big businesses that make lots of money. And then I run into this thing where it's like they do something that was like, I just can't understand how like a business that would make so much more than anything I've ever made could make a mistake that I'm like, but
It's obvious.
yeah, like I've worked with people that make less money, that were making less money probably per year than I am now, who didn't make this mistake that this, however gigantic company made. It really is, astounding, and it certainly makes you have some perspective on how much you can accomplish when you see how much other people have accomplished with all the mistakes they still make.
Yeah, but it's also about those blind spots, you don't really have to see it because you are inside the company and you don't have that step back. And because a lot of people don't really spend time doing any kind of self-reflection or getting some kind of feedback for their company. If the company is doing really, really well and they go and grow fast, it's really hard to keep that foundation like really solid. That's why most of the companies then when you like when at least what I talk with the consultants and stuff like that, they usually address the stuff that are really basic, because those are the stuff that usually those kind of business people or business owners overlook. You have that kind of even belief that, oh yeah, we did that already, and we have to do that or that. Like, even from the perspective of freelancers, like if you look at most of the freelancers, if they don't have enough clients, if they struggle to have enough job money, everything goes back to one thing: is their confidence. Like, I can show you a lot of people who are really, really lousy and seriously really bad freelancers, but they can chill really, really, they can sell shit really well. Like, what's the difference? Like, you have those freelancers who are actually having no problem selling stuff, their services, but they are really bad and they can't deliver. And then you have really good people who are doing their job and they can deliver, but they can get clients.
Right.
And it's all about the confidence. Like, if you're not feeling like you're good enough, how the person on the call or on the other side should hire you, should believe you that you will do the job if you don't feel like you are good enough.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to even think of, like, when I started trying to move into, well, not trying to, when I started moving into more like strategic elements and like marketing, for example, things that I didn't have as much familiarity with or training on or whatever. I just decided to do it. Like, I'm not gonna say that like I instantly like adapted to everything and knew exactly what I had to do everywhere, but I figured out how to do something, and then I built off of whatever that was. And then if I got to the point where like I at least knew what I had to do to make something that was not correct. Like, just basically decided I wanted to reach the cookie on the counter, and just kind of had to figure out how to, crawl, then how to walk, and then how to continue to stay on my feet while I reached. And I think that really largely does just come back to people, um I mean, having the confidence, but even just like not having the doubt, which I know it's kind of like splitting hairs at that point where it's like, um is what's the difference between not being in doubt and having confidence? But there are a lot of people who are just like so freaking blinded by like their obliviousness to like anything but what they want. And admittedly, like, that's me sometimes, where it's like there's like people have called me brave a bunch of times, and I'm like, regardless of what the context was, like, I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but you have to be afraid to be brave. And most of the time I'm just so focused on what I want that I just don't give a shit. So it's like, oh, you're so brave for doing this. It's like, I wasn't focused on like losing this thing. So it's interesting to me to like to bring that back to the element of like living within somebody's purpose, where it's like, because sometimes, particularly when somebody is lacking like awareness, and I'm not going to assume that somebody's like a Michael Jordan of whatever they're doing, it can be easy to get misled by thinking that you're working in the interest of something when like you may not be. So for example, like as a musician, there are a lot of people who would maybe justify not showing up for work or something like that at a job that they don't like, because they'd rather be practicing or rather be doing this or that. But I know from personal experience of working with many musicians is that most of the time it's just a crock of shit, and what they really want is to just not be working. And so that is a case of the person using that thing as a scapegoat. In the previous example that I mentioned, you know, you kind of addressed it in a certain way, and I'm wondering if you still see that as the same kind of situation, or if you see that differently in terms of like the self-worth element.
Well, the thing is that a lot of people wouldn't really even go into trying it because they would have those kind of limiting beliefs, like it's I don't know, it's not the right time. They are too
Mm,
old to try. For example, for me, when I was starting with Shaolin, one friend of mine actually messaged me like, "Are you fit enough to do that?" And I was like, "Well, no, that's why I'm doing it." You know, but like for him it was like you have to be fit enough to start to do martial arts. For
mm,
me it was I need to build the muscles, because the muscles you're actually using, knowing what it is, what you're actually using, and the flexibility you need to actually do those kind of things, it's just impossible to be fit enough to do that unless you're training from the really young age.
mm.
So in my 30s, really start to do some kind of martial art on like the different level and really mean it, means, well, yeah, I will suffer because it's just what it is, you know.
Yeah, I remember hearing
But a lot
about.
of people would go with the same attitude towards like their purpose, like, oh no, it's already late, you know, I miss my whatever, and
Right.
like, you know, I'm just gonna humiliate myself because it's just, yeah, it's just too late to do that, and I'm too old and I don't have enough money to do that, and it's gonna take too much time, and yeah, like the time I have in the evening is not gonna be enough. Like, why would you do that? Like, isn't it better to spend at least 1 hour per day doing actually something, working towards something that you love and that actually means something, instead of like just spending the day and then thinking about how horrible your life is because you don't get to do anything.
Yeah, there was a post that I saw recently that I think was supposedly by The Rock in 2022. You never know if something's by somebody or if somebody just, says something and put a photo of a celebrity on it. But it was paraphrased. It was, why would don't work 8 hours a day for somebody else's business or goals, and then come home and don't work on your own. You're not tired, you're uninspired.
Yeah.
And I, granted, I do have to tend to have a rather extreme view on some of these things, but I do agree with it where it's that because I was the person who was working at like one minimum wage job that was part time, that was not enough to pay for the bills, and then worked at or pay the bills, pay for the bills. Um, I'm from Buffalo, but I don't pay for the Buffalo Bills, and I had another job that was literally um, I basically had like 3 to 4 hours of free time between the two jobs in general, which meant that my sleep schedule sucked ass. And at one point, like I was literally sleeping like 3 hours a day for like I think like 3 weeks or so. Because there was not enough time to do that. And then I would have one crash day and that would be it. And I wasn't really accomplishing much while I was like exhausted, but then at the same time, I was also always trying to move myself in a given direction. And I was actually, now that I think about it, I still had a band going during that time. And so it felt like I was doing nothing, but I was still like making those practices happen as if it was like second nature, because again, that's the area of pursuing things that matter to me that has always been easiest for me, is that if I want to do it, I don't doubt whether or not I can do it. I just move in the direction of what I want. Um, so when I think about the nature of people like being in like a really tough situation where it's like really inconvenient to work on something, it's really hard for me to relate to that because I'm like, okay, so you're going to put in all this work doing something you hate, but you can't spare 5, 10, 15 minutes doing this. It's like, well, I don't, well, but it's going to take hours of work. It's like, Yeah, it is. It's like, well, I don't have hours. It's like, okay, but you know what hours are made up of? Minutes. You know what minutes are made up of? Seconds. Could you spend 5 seconds working on this thing that matters? Like, well, yeah, okay. How about 20? How about 60? How about 120? Well, that's 2 minutes. And 2 minutes is, what, a 30th of a percent of, so the point being is that uh, when you think of things at a given scale, it seems like a no-brainer that you can work on what matters most to you. And that's why I think that, like, when it comes to habits, for example, like like Atomic Habits is a book that I really liked. I think what books you like and don't like depends on which books you read at what point, because at some point they all kind of just like, repeat each other. But a big element of starting a habit is like to just anchor it to the end of something you
The
do
new
all
thing.
day, or every day rather. Um, and so when I think about the nature of incorporating what means the most to me, for example, I've always struggled with the structure element of things because I am so kind of like emotionally driven by those things. But at the same time, like I need to not be doing it. I need I need to avoid not doing it, because saying not 3 times probably is confusing as hell, simply based on the lack of interest, because I can't have the artistic temperament, messing with what I want to be doing. And I guess in that regard, what have you found worked to help people kind of get out of that perspective, or try, overcome that kind of situation? Because I feel like that probably applies in a lot of situations where, like, because people have this negative current experience that they're contrasting with what they really want to be doing, they kind of idolize it as like this thing I'm always going to enjoy and it's always going to come naturally and I'm never going to have to work hard at it or do something outside my comfort zone for it. And they get there, it's like, holy shit, like there's a lot of work here. So I guess, I'll shut up and let you just kind of respond.
Yes, I think the difference is between the dream and doing really the research, because you can't really compare something that you come up in your mind. Like, sure, you will dream about something, but you need to know more, and you need to talk to people who actually achieve that, because it's gonna be helpful. Like, they can give you their perspective, you can ask questions, you can you can just get more data. And that's really important, because those kind of things are going to help you to get there and to get that vision or that clarity about the things that you actually want to achieve. Because in the past, for example, me, I was always like, I would say I was one of those people who would be like really stubborn about stuff. And I would be like, oh yeah, this is going to help me, so I'm going to do that. And then when I did that, I would get like, oh yeah, that's gonna be it, you know. And I would be doing things like, okay, this. My issue is that I'm overachiever, so I get to do things really fast.
Hmm.
If I want something, I'm just gonna get it. And that was, I guess, my luck as well, because I was really hardworking and I didn't care about my, I don't know, fun life, you know. Like, I was really striving to be happy, and I thought that it's going to be that one thing and then another and another and another. And at one point, I just stopped and I was like, okay, this is bullshit, because none of these things actually made me happy.
Hmm.
And I got to the point where I really just like managed to fulfill my childhood dream and buy like the ridiculous expensive camera that I wanted. And I thought I'm not never going to be having it, because I grew up here in Czech Republic and that camera was like half year rent, you know. So it didn't make sense to really just like go for it, because like even if I would have that money, I would probably didn't invest it into buying that camera. But then I moved and it's the situation changed and I got it. And I was like, okay, and what's now? What is it really going to take now, if not even like something I wanted as my childhood dream didn't make me happy long term?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it's the difference between the goal and the actual living of it. It's, it's like when people like they're in high school or middle school or whatever, and they have like a crush on someone, and then the situation ends up where they actually end up with that person. They're like, huh. And that's
Yeah.
I think that's just the simplest way to do it, where it's like, uh,
Really? Yeah.
okay. It's I remember hearing like some like girl friends of mine who had like that like fantasized about like kissing the boy and then they finally kissed him and it was like a really shitty kisser. So that's got to be like an interesting kind of experience, but uh it is definitely, I think, a difference between like passion and hmm, novelty, I guess. And I don't like
Yeah,
whatever that
definitely this.
superficial, yeah,
Yeah.
differentiator is, because like athletes are passionate. They experience a lot of pain while living that passion.
Yeah.
Whether that takes the form of injuries or even just their everyday, like literally doing what they want, necessitates suffering of some kind. Even if you just define, well, I guess you would have to view it as suffering, I suppose, like the experience of pain is suffering. So I suppose even that is kind of like a mindset thing. But um, I think that's a reason why maybe a lot of people kind of stumble when it comes to actually pursuing the things that are important to them, because so many people, I think, get used to defining what is bad in terms of how unpleasant it is. And then when they look at what they really want, whether that's true or not, it's usually something fanciful. It's something that lacks that struggle or lacks that pain or so on. And I almost wonder if there's like a certain way, like to fact check that, like as you're going through it, like how to determine if you're just full of shit. Like what have you? I don't know if I already asked you a question like this earlier on, but I figured
No,
I'd
I
ask you.
don't think you did. I don't think there's really one way how to do it unless you do some self-reflection.
Hmm.
And that's something that I'm forcing to do all my mentees like once in a while, or at least on the sessions with me. They're going through the week, like what happened, what worked, what didn't work, you know, and you just go back and really reflect on things, what was happening and what you could do better, not because you need some critical stuff like pinpoint, but because you want to improve.
Hmm.
And you will be like, yeah, this is what I managed really well. This is what I could do better and how I could do better, and just reflect on stuff like that, and learning to do it automatically is going to set you on a totally different level, because you will be like, even in the situation when you in discussions with people, you will be like, okay, now I need to stop because I'm being a jackass.
Man.
Because sometimes you just go like you go into emotional whatever, the spiral and stuff, and you at one point you will be just trying to prove your point, while it's not anymore about the thing that you originally discussed, but about you proving that you're right.
Right.
And everybody does that. Most of the people won't realize it until it's too late, because they will be like, okay, well, haha, I won. But at the same time, you have lost that person, because they're just not going to talk to you anymore. Like,
Right.
sure, you won the battle, you won the discussion, you were right, but was the price of being right?
Right. It's kind of like it's your Thanos moment. He's like, "Did you do it?" Yes. What did it cost? Everything. Granted, Thanos
Yeah,
didn't regret
yeah.
what he did, but it's so maybe this is not the best example, I guess. But uh, it is interesting to think of like the nature of that balance between like when we really just get like heated up about something versus like where we're really coming from. because like everybody's had like that friend or that person that they know who at one point the person's like they're talking to them and the other person's really upset and they're like saying all this stuff and you're like, that's bullshit and you know it. Like normal you knows this. But you right now is just so full of shit. And like, yeah, I'm gonna keep listening to you, but it's like it's not that you don't like the person, but you don't like how they're being right now. And it's like,
Yeah.
stop doing this to yourself and just go back to not being like this. Um, I know I've lived, I've lived through that experience with a number of people, and it's like I know sometimes people just kind of need to go through the motions with that. Um, but just the notion of, I guess, because I know we're getting to the end of the hour, but like the knowing that inevitably through what for one reason or another, pursuing what is actually your purpose, your passion, and so on, is going to lead into something that's like confusing or unpleasant or whatever it is. I guess keeping in mind that like when you're in that state of mind, everything just seems completely different. It's like somebody just turned all the lights off. How to, for people who are not like us and who are just like so goddamn stubborn that we're just kind of like, well, I still want it because this hasn't changed anything. For people who are not like that, what have you found is something that can be like really useful for that? Because like you said, so often the difference between the person who is successful and the person who just falls by the wayside and gives up is just that they just keep walking, basically. So
Well, the attitude, yeah, attitude towards what you're doing and actually just following what feels right. Because a lot of people don't even know what they want to do.
mm,
And the best thing is just try different things, like what feels right. At one point you will just come across something and the things start to click. Just follow where you are inclined to go or what you are inclined to do. There is some kind of pattern that's going to click into one thing at one point. It doesn't have to be now, it doesn't have to be in a year, but if you will be building that kind of thing and you will be like, okay, this feels right, this is fun, I'm going to pursue that. Once you go there, from there you go to another thing and it's gonna just come up at one point.
mm,
And especially like for the person, you stay within your integrity because you will know that, okay, this is me staying in who I am and doing what feels right, because you can't mess up something when it feels right. Like you would have to bullshit yourself to really
mm,
do that and it still wouldn't feel right. Like you can convince yourself that something is going to be okay, but you won't feel okay.
yeah, I guess it does come back to that notion of, and I even remember making like a remark or post about it like somewhere in the past where it's like of all the resources people have access to, like whether it's people training, this, that, the other thing, retreats, frameworks, friggin' Spartan workout thing, whatever it is, cold showers. At the end of the day, the most valuable thing people really have to like living the best lives that they can is to literally just shut everything out and have that sense of stillness and then just have whatever that conversation is with themselves that they need to have, or just ask questions and just kind of, like you said, like maybe now isn't when they find the answer, but maybe like either way they need to ask the question. Like it needs to be posited, it needs to be out there, because otherwise it's really just going to be kind of that mental math that inevitably just like falls apart and they never solve the equation. It's kind of like the same thing of like writing something down. If you never give it that chance to kind of, I guess, live out in a space that's not just in your head, it's kind of impossible to really find what that might actually be, because it really is interesting how getting that notion of that external nature of what it is, whether it's asking the question out loud or writing it down, really does change a lot of how people experience like those kinds of thoughts, and I do kind of wonder where that comes from.
Well, the thing is that you actually like showing yourself that you are worthy to have that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And the biggest mistake most of the people do are actually sharing it with somebody who is going to negate it.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest mistake I ever did. And all the people I have met, they told me the same. Like once you get to that point where you decide, but you still have some kind of doubts because you never did it, it's something new, it's
Mhm.
going to take some work. You still have those kind of doubts at the beginning because even though you have decided to do it, there is still a lot of unknown, and it's kind of dangerous for your brain to pursue that.
Hmm.
So in that case, you're fighting already with your mind because you don't know what you're doing.
Oh, Skynet was messing with her connection to begin with. I guess we're gonna have to see. We're gonna see if in a few seconds if it'll work. If it makes her disconnect. But I forget who had this issue the other week. I think it was Chrislyn, maybe. Yeah, it was Chrislyn where she just got kicked off. So yeah, Lana's Wi-Fi was already messing with her, and she was attending via. Oh, there it is.
Oh, did
See,
you froze? Yeah.
it wasn't
Okay.
me.
Was it me?
I think it was maybe the hotspot thing.
Okay. Well, so what I was saying is that like the when you actually decide something and you still have those doubts at the back of your mind because your brain
Hmm.
is telling you that it's new, it's unfamiliar, it's dangerous.
Right.
You need to really either keep it for yourself. If you don't have a person who is 100% supportive, is going to be non-judgmental, is not going to tell you like, look, this is just not something that you should be doing. Because people have that, like, even the best of us will be like, oh, are you sure you want to do that?
Right. It's
Sometimes it's just there because you have your own limiting beliefs, and sometimes you just have to project it on some people. So why don't not keep it for yourself and just start building it, start having that confidence, and once you're ready, you can share it with the people so they can actually help you to achieve it,
yeah. I think
but
it's
not at
important.
that beginning stage.
I think it's important to remember that when you mention things to those people, and this is something that usually you have to find out the hard way, unfortunately, but uh, when you mention things like this to people, you're not just dealing with how they feel towards you, you're dealing with how they feel and think towards themselves.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but as stupid as a lot of people can be, like on the surface, subconsciously, I think subconsciously, a lot of people suppress their intelligence because they can come up with some really like clever excuses why not to do things. And if they were just plain stupid, they wouldn't be able to come up with such clever excuses. And so when you mention something that involves pursuing something you're passionate about that may be risky, maybe you don't know everything that you're doing from the start, but you want to do it anyway, and then you mention it to somebody else, to acknowledge the value of that, they don't just need to believe that you can do it, they need to acknowledge that it's possible to do it.
Yeah.
And if they have something that they're passionate about, but they're afraid to risk doing, like risk compromising, the safety of what they're already doing, then to support your idea is tantamount to calling themselves a coward. And nobody wants to call themselves, well, people in general don't want to do that. And so that is
Yeah.
something, like you said, to keep in mind when you talk to people. It's like, I don't, I do think it varies very much depending on the individual, whether or not they should tell no one, because some people absolutely do need to have that outside support to feel like like it's even worth starting. Like even for example, my pal Lisa, who I'm now working, on my books and, the marketing and such for what we're doing, because she's also creating like a graphic novel for it. I had written the book that we're working, that we're trying to spread now before she read it. But before she read it and like really said that like what it meant to her, I didn't really feel any fire to like try to get it out there. And so I was always going to be passionate about writing and things like that. And eventually I would have gotten to that. But still sharing that with her and then her mentioning what it meant to her was the catalyst for it becoming what it did at the time that it did. So I do think that it depends on um, who you are and also who you tell, which
Yeah, but then you share it after you wrote the book. You have already achieved that, and you were past that stage.
so you mean at the given stage. I see
I
what you
mean,
mean.
I
Yeah.
mean, like in the stage where you are right at the beginning and you're about to start, just start
Mhm.
doing it.
You're
Like
not sure.
don't
Okay.
second guess it. Just do the beginning stage, and then when you just like, I don't know, I'm not sure where you should go or what should you do next. You already have some work that you can show to people. I think that's a lot of copywriters who are doing the same mistake, that they would be asking, what should I do at the beginning, when they did nothing.
Yeah, just
Like
keep
if you,
studying.
yeah, if you are doing no research, if you are doing no writing, if you have done literally zero and you're just thinking about starting, just start.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing should be perfect. Like no matter there is no degree of preparation that you can do when you haven't done it that's going to prepare you for what is going to be required when you are doing it. So
And you have no questions, like you have no specific questions to ask, and you're actually wasting the time of the person you're asking, because you're not asking anything that will be helpful to you specifically. Like
yeah,
if you're not doing the research and just not spending some time actually being interested in the topic, like how do you even know that it's going to be something that is going to be really for you?
right. You can't want to
It's
be an
just the
astronaut until
idea.
you know what it takes to be an astronaut.
Yeah, like, it's that idea, that shiny object syndrome that is going to come up just because you can make a lot of money online. Well, you can make a lot of money online doing a lot of stuff. So what, are you going to start doing everything? No.
Right. Yeah, there's a huge difference between like making money, doing something you're passionate about and making money as an OnlyFans person. Which I mean, hey, if you're passionate about, whatever is entailed with it, I mean, by all means, but it's like, yeah, there's always a way to make it work. And I guess kind of to close things out a bit, another thing I was talking to my buddy Andrew about was that uh, if you need to choose between integrity and practicality, then you're just incompetent. And it's one of those things where like if you're foolish enough to pursue something when you don't really know what you're doing, you're probably the person who will reach the end, because it's not like you don't need to have faith or whatever. You don't need to have a given term for why you're doing it. You just basically need to decide like to give the stack, so to speak, like they do in marketing, where it's like, oh, here's what you're gonna get. You know, once you have that stillness of mind enough times, or why did I go blurrier than a
Right? I
friggin'
don't know.
LSD vision? Okay, here we go. Right at the very end. See, even the camera's getting tired, I guess. Um, once you get enough stillness, enough of those questions and such generating, that you can at least know, like, okay, this is what I actually value. This is what's actually important to me. And like once you get that perspection perspective of like what serves that overall, and then you just let yourself kind of go in whatever direction feels like it's the right way, and then you just kind of figure out as you go. It does seem like that kind of ends up being what most people do. Is there anything you'd want to to add to that, or?
Yeah, just make sure that everything you do is value driven instead of beliefs or whatever money. If you go back and you will do the self-reflection on, okay, are those actions actually something that I'm proud of and
Hmm.
that are in and or like in congruency in like, with my values, it will have a huge impact on your life because you will stay in that integrity. Because staying in integrity is a nice thing to say, but a lot of people won't go that step further and will be like, yeah, but here I didn't really go the way I should have.
Hmm.
So value driven actions and yeah, just see how it goes.
And there you have it. Well, I appreciate you not just giving me your time, but also obviously, your actual perspective and your expertise on things, because I know only what I know. And I know it's everything, but I like to at least pretend like I don't know. No. So I do like to give people with actual more involved perspective and what I'm talking about, because at the end of the day, I only know what it's like to solve things from my perspective, and there are blind spots that I'm going to have, or things that I needed to work on that somebody else didn't need to work on, but they need to work on something else. Like our stubbornness, like made it so that like pursuing what's important to us in the moment is not generally something that we would struggle with as much as somebody who's like they're really indecisive. But then on the other hand, like it can be really easy for us to be like abrasive or like, well, too too bad, I'm doing this anyway, and like just not processing was like, oh right, this affects things. Like I actually need to take this into account. So, or at least it's been a problem that I've had. So yes, I look forward to once again reconnoitering on a future podcast episode. And I guess since I'm actually kind of getting this out into the world now where people can access it, is there anywhere that you'd want, if somebody's interested in what you shared, like where you'd like them to go, or, you know,
Yeah, just Facebook, I guess.
okay, you can you can type her name into Facebook, but it's going to have those interesting little symbols above it that us
Yeah.
Americans don't fully understand. But she's definitely far more receptive to meeting new people on Facebook than I am in that sense. I need to have like some kind of semblance of who somebody is before I accept it. Um, but yeah, as long as you don't actually, even if you do start a conversation by saying something about her appearance or whatever, she's found ways to turn that into something meaningful anyway. So just hit her up and she'll either make it a good conversation or, you know, make you feel like an idiot. And there you have it. Um, Thanks again, Lana, and hopefully I can get you back on here soon.
Bye.
Yeah.